exposition of my favorite string quartet by Mozart. And it's hard to say favorite when all of them are so amazingly lovable. K421 D minor. I must say that after all these years of loving Mozart's music, when I come back to this quartet, I find everything I love about Mozart since I was first a child, without the knowledge about the works, without the awareness about the style, the operas, the Haydn, the Beethoven, the Viennese, the this, the that, all these things which accumulate as layers and layers and layers of sandwich knowledge, which we're supposed to digest after studies and then somehow become perhaps too wise or sometimes pedantic. And I don't say that with irony, because it's part of the knowledge. You dispense it, you have sometimes the impression while dispensing it that while you struggled gathering it, that you become some kind of important person because you know important things, but in fact you are the child in the sense not only in age, but in the sense of the naive first interaction with this music. It just takes you, or it doesn't. And if it does, it takes you, meaning your imagination, your heart, your drive, your whatever, perhaps even, and that's the best part of it, for the wrong reasons. Perhaps you think about it and you appropriate it through the filter of your own psyche, regardless of how much you're advanced in your own path of life to understand it. It doesn't matter, because in a way, at the beginning at least, it talks to your psyche directly. The sense of urgency of now, the sense of drive, the sense of youthful, uninterrupted energy, without a build-up to a climax, an organization of formal structures, which it does follow some, but the essence of that within the form is a constant gazer. We have three energies going on at the same time in that first movement. The melodic bass line, which is, I think, crucial, which seems to be oblivious to whatever else is happening, as if it's dictating the fate of things. And then the labor, the hard work, the hope, it's the dailiness of humanity. And these repeated notes he pounds, and of course in the string instruments with the change of bow you hear more pom 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 pom, and a sense of pulse like a heartbeat, pom pom. On the piano it sounds da da da, as if it's more percussive, which it is by the essence of the piano is a percussive instrument. Pianists are in denial of that. Oh, but no, I sing with the piano. Of course you do, but it's a make-believe of the vibrations and reverberations of the resonances. In the K310 sonata, he does that for the piano in the only time the pounding chords of the drama, in the case associated to the death of his mother. But the point is that even we take out all contextual situations, there is something about the ostinato of the tonic and something about the repetitive harmonic progression that is married to the rhythmic pulse. It's not the Alberti, not either a harmonic melodic bass, I'm trying to make the string quartet fit in the K310 sonata, but anyway it doesn't work. So these pounding chords, which Beethoven would use in his Waldstein Sonata are the accompaniment of the K310, and in a way the inner parts of the string quartet of K421 with that eighth note rest at the get-go of this pattern of 4, which allows for the melodic note every time placed on its downbeat to be heard alone. And therefore the harmonization comes after, as an afterthought. So you have the driven element of the accompaniment, but it is almost beaten by that eighth note rest. I find that eighth note rest on the downbeat in the accompaniment, it's almost a violence. To hear the leap of the octave, which is dramatic drop in the melodic line, and then the leap of the 10th going up, go down by the harmonic melodic line of the mode, with the augmented second, going down, dropping the leading tone. Yes, one can say that D minor is not an unfamiliar key to Mozart, who will write later the Requiem in D minor. Examples, but they overwhelm me with emotion, and I try to remain as I should, since I'm talking to you, with a point that I want to make, besides the beauties that overwhelm me, the meaningful beauties that overwhelm me when I hear this music. But the point of the D minor was an example of a similar tonality as the opening of the quartet. I must say that something is to be told about the choice of tonalities. We all guess and none of us knows. After all, some instrumental factors come in account when you write for an instrument in a given tonality. Usually wind music is flat keys because of the instruments being more or less tuned B flat, E flat. And string instruments more or less sharp keys because of the 4 strings of the string instruments, which predispose to play a finger in terms of sharp keys. That's why mostly concerti are in A major, in D major, in G major for strings, and in B flat major, E flat major for clarinet, like Weber or Mozart for the strings, and many others. Of course, you have the exceptions of Strauss writing a violin and piano sonata in E flat major. Now that is not, because A major for second Brahms, and the third most famous, perhaps most developed of Brahms' 3 sonatas for violin is in D minor, like in this case. The choices of tonalities, in this case perhaps connected to the instrument, in this case of course string instruments, and Mozart played viola and violin. composers wrote for instruments they played. Tchaikovsky for the violin concerto, Brahms, well, he had very close acquaintance violinist who helped him develop it. Not that he wrote it for him, of course not, but it helps to have that kinship. But you know, I think tonality ultra, well, today we are tuned more or less to 440, 445, 443, 438, depending on some conductors wish to have the brass more bright in the temperament of the resonances for the orchestral color, and in some traditions some orchestras play a little temperament lower than others. It's not a big deal in difference that you can hear it as a semitone. No, it's less if you have a perfect pitch, but if you don't, you perceive it by the color that it brings. But so therefore the temperament of the tuning changed since Mozart's time. And so the violinist who was Brahms's friend was Joachim. That's what I meant to say earlier. And I think that Stadler was the clarinetist who was the friend of Mozart. And in the two cases, you can see that the clarinet concerto by Mozart and the violin concerto by Brahms wouldn't have existed without Stadler for Mozart and Joachim for Brahms. Or they would, but not perhaps the way they, or perhaps, I don't know, how will we guess. But it is important that when it is the instrument of the composer, in the case the viola for Mozart, who played within the quartets that they played for patrons in salons, and he composed for the evening. Also often two viola quintets. Oh, the two viola quintets. Or the D major one. Minore. Almost the color of the D minor Mozart quartet in question. I get turned away because the examples bring me to other thoughts. I have to stay on board, focus and merge on K421. I think that being a violist brought to Mozart the capacity to be in the heart of the quartet. Not the melody on the top, which is the most obvious to follow, not the melodic bass line, which is there to support in the cello, but this intertwined part with the second violin, where everything is cooked in the quartet, the harmonization, the secondary voicization, that's not the word existing. And so I remember being so enchanted when I discovered this quartet about how the inner voice leadings are so beautifully designed, when most of the time the regular ear of a casual listener, be it a music lover, perceives some kind of condensed version of the music, not so much the individual layers, beauties of the inner world, if you want. And I find that fascinated me already very young, because I found that Mozart is the composer, in my childish way of seeing, who doesn't leave dust under the rug. Well, when you compose yourself, you know that it's tough to make sure everything is meaningful and beautiful. Sometimes you have some elements, you don't know where to put them, or how to hide them, or how to get with something not really making sense going to the next section. All these bridges, all these B sections, all these I don't know what sections, all these ways to compose the following idea after the first. What do I do after? Either repeat it or continue. Then you group months by 4, then you go to the dominant, then perhaps you start on the relative major. Turning in rounds, because you realize that you've done the relative, you've done the subdominant, you've done the different visits to the more or less close cousins of the tonal system, and finally you follow the book of the rules of Haydn's sonata form, and you did the bridge, the second theme, contrasting, blah blah. Okay, I'm not belittling all this knowledge. I think it's essential to have an organization of the chaos of the world by a form with rules. Constitution for a country, and sonata form for classical music that can be applied to a symphony or to a quartet or to a sonata or to a trio, etc. It gives a sense of GPS flow that the listener who doesn't know the music can recognize by being aware where they are more or less in the piece when you follow the format. But because of the variety of the input that you put into it in terms of the emotional, the thematic, the narrative, the meaningful exception to all other rules that could almost, and sometimes does, break the form in which it is, because it's almost like overbursting and needs to be no more harnessed by that rule of the first, second theme, bridge, development, recap, bridge, coda, etc. Composers broke it and re-established it constantly. Berg broke it, Liszt broke it, Chopin re-established it in 4 movements. Whenever Berg and Brahms in 5 for the first sonata, Berg in 1, as I said earlier, Prokofiev also in 1, Scriabin mostly in several, 2, 3, 4, but sometimes even in 1 for the 5th. In other words, they all call it sonata, but it wasn't the form as much. Beethoven started breaking it in 2 movements. Mozart stayed in the classical 3, with the exception of the E minor violin sonata, which is in 2 movements. I get sidetracked again. Well, it could have been a D minor sonata. Here, or the E minor. I realize I have Mademoiselle Boulanger's way of connecting dots by interlacing with other thoughts. Oh my God, I'm confusing you all. I'm so sorry. I'll try to stay more to the point, because now I go back to the reason for which I meant these examples, which was that the temperament of the time of Mozart was not today's. In other words, between then and today we have more or less approximately, I want to be so cautious, but it is too important because I'm not historical instrument performer, but about half a tone or semitone. Therefore, chances are that my fingers don't want to play it in C sharp minor. My dear friends of relative pitch, you don't mind, right? Because it could have been an E flat minor. Therefore, our friends with perfect pitch, we are in trouble. Because once we discovered it in D minor, to be D minor. We think there is a purpose for it to be D minor, the Requiem, the D minor fantasy. At least in the tuning pitch of today at 440 and not which to us it's C sharp minor, and obviously, even without the synesthesia of Scriabin, who attributed colors to tonalities, we think C sharp minor with a different color because we associate it also to other C sharp minor pieces, and then all of a sudden it becomes another piece. So we convince ourselves by something which in fact is not objective. If the pitch changed, that means that people heard it, either they thought that was D minor, therefore they thought D minor, even if the pitch of it was not the D minor of the pitch we hear today. It's difficult to explain and probably appears unnecessarily complicated to describe, because most people are not bothered by that, since most people enjoy hearing it with none or a parallel pitch, which is very helpful because the interval is what matters. If it is, so if you tune, the music will sound more or less relaxed in terms of temperament if it's lower. And more sharp if it's higher. Ago, I made experience to play the Prelude and Fugues of Bach's well-tempered clavier. That goes without to say, but it has to be mentioned to avoid confusion, because Mendelssohn, Shostakovich, and many more also wrote Prelude and Fugues. But in the case of Bach's, we are so used, since most of us learn them as pianists when they're more or less young, or should. We associate them to the tonalities in which they are written, like the first one in C major, since he wrote in one for each key. The first one starts in C major, and for us C major, especially pianist, is the key diatonic without black keys. So skeleton of C major, but if you hear it in C sharp major, you start hearing it more elevated. If you hear it, of course, it's more elevated in the range, but it's also in the smaller distances of semitone between C major and compared to B major. You don't hear it really higher or lower, you just hear it a little different. And why do you hear it a little different? I think it's because of a cultural factor. You've heard many pieces in different keys, and you associate the striking ones that struck your attention, your emotion, and you think, okay, Beethoven's Symphony in C minor. So everything in C minor will be dramatic. Beethoven only wrote dramatic in C minor, the K111. Sorry, not K from Beethoven. I went too fast. Opus 111 sonata, or the earlier C minor sonata. They're all in common with the Pathétique sonata and the Fifth Symphony. And the Third Concerto. That all dramatic pieces in Beethoven's writing are associated to C minor. It's mostly the case. Mostly the case. C minor in Book 1, C minor Book 2. Or you can say, okay, Bach decided to write all velocity sonata preludes in C minors. And in C sharp minor, Book 1, and the fugue. Introspective, to say the least. That was A sharp, sorry. Well, there are 20 years between the two books, but there are some similarities. C sharp minor, Book 2. Even if it's an elegant Siciliana, it's still reflective. And the fugue in unmeasured, not unmeasured, unrhythmized patterns, more flowing. Metronome marking, since Beethoven only had the last few years of his own life, way after Bach's death in 1820s, to discover the metronome in Melzel's shop in Vienna and start writing retroactively tempi marking for his symphonies, alas not for his sonatas, except some, like 106, which he had home at that time, and the rest were given up when he sold them by the fact that they were commissions. And so it was the first attempt to objectivize the tempo that you wanted to have, and therefore in the prelude and fugues in Bach, 1720s, 1740s, and he died in 1750, perhaps the fugue was played and perhaps he didn't matter to him because it was exercises in his eyes, even if very elaborate, of preludes and fugues. And so the interpretation can go through that, and we can associate them by our way of expressing the meaning of them. Like perhaps for Bach also some tonalities were more reflective, like C sharp minor, and more driven like C minor. But that is to do with the instrument, probably for the harpsichord, I think, compared to cantatas or sinfonias or whatever he wrote, the Brandenburg Concerti. And I think that even being an organist as he was, different churches in which he played had organs tuned sometimes up to a third of difference in terms of the fact that he wrote famous prelude and fugues for organ in a given tonality, like G minor fantasy. I always believe that he must have been troubled, or then managed to organize his brain from his perfect pitch that I assume he had. I don't know why I assume that, but I don't have any proof, but let's say he did. And then playing in G minor and hearing E minor must be very disturbing for somebody who has perfect pitch, because you associate the pitch to the tone, to the finger, to the note, to the key. But nevertheless, he did. And the C minor Passacaglia for organ organ must have sounded in A minor, perhaps, in another church. And it must have bothered him, perhaps, or perhaps he just adjusted to it. There was to do with the fact that we do have also pieces that are meaningful in the intent. And when he writes the D minor toccata and fugue for organ, very famous today, we know he meant it in D minor. He didn't say in any minor on which organ's tuning you'll play. Even if perhaps it sounded, I don't know, rapport of the tonalities is the same in terms of tones, semitones, the tetrachords, and therefore the transposition is not a modulation, the transposition is not an interpretation, the transposition is not a transcription, the transposition is not a recomposition, the transposition is in a way a mindset in which you place yourself by hearing it a little higher, a little lower, but when you play it you have to involve the industry of playing. That confuses me more. And I remember Mademoiselle Boulanger, in the end of her long life, when I was starting to become a teenager, finally, no more the child, in those intense weeks of 3 hours a week of 3 lessons, plus the 2 group classes and the 2 intense summers in Fontainebleau months, she kept wanting us to listen to the well-tempered clavier, which we were practicing, and I had to write down from memory in clefs and on staffs weekly before I even start playing each of the prelude and fugues and go back through them in circles and circles. It's almost like Sisyphus in the allegory of antique Greece, never reaching the top of the mountain because always dropping before and restarting. So I felt the same thing. But nevertheless, it was an interesting fact that on her turntable of the 1970s, and hers was not very modern, didn't have pitch control as some did at the time, where you could adjust that semitone difference because of the voltage that was different in different homes. And it was 110 or 220, but some were 223, some were 118, some are 109. Whatever it was not a very stable current. And when you had to hear the 33.33 RPM spinning, the well-tempered clavier of Richter's recordings, which she played for us at some of the group classes, they played for her in the wrong key. Because she seemed to tell us that in old age she lost her perfect pitch by hearing everything semitone too high. So she asked me to play them adjusted, therefore transposed, because when I was playing them, she wanted to hear them like she used to listen to them when she was young. So I had not only to memorize them, not only write them from memory, not write them only in the clefs in layers, meaning in different staffs for the group of voices for each of the fugues, but also I had to transpose them on the keyboard. So at some point you think, this is very confusing. This child that I was must have been in a situation where if he had this driven love for music, he must have lost it in the midst of all these incredible complications for learning the music from the ground up, instead of just taking a recording and a score and just playing it and reciting the notes. I had to get from the ground up a la Bach's time, students, which was you copy the score before you learn it, and by copying you study as well the compositional aspect of the piece, then the interpretational aspect that will come up from your knowledge of the piece from the ground up. Instead of starting from the top and trying to analyze it to understand which harmony, where do I modulate, oh, that was the melody, so I don't get lost in my memory a second time in the relative major, and this first time this and that. You memorize this kind of landmarks, but and you need to, and you have to go fast, and you have no time, and you don't have perfect pitch, or you do, but you don't know exactly what to do with it. Whenever in those days I was a child, so my teacher took the time for me to intensely work on learning the music ground up. And so the Quartet by Mozart, I played reading the score with the viola clef, which most pianists don't read. which was relatively easy because I had Mademoiselle Dieudonné, her assistant, or alter ego as we used to call her, the other her for Boulanger, who was our music theory teacher, more the music grammar teacher, assistant in a way that she complemented when Mademoiselle Boulanger was herself more the philosophy music teacher. And they complemented very well. Though Mademoiselle Dieudonné made us, and me especially, oh God, sight read good emails, that's more wrongly pronounced Flemish name, of a composer of many centuries ago, whose scores were for 6 parts, string instruments, all in different clefs at the same time. The first, the second, the third, and the fourth of the C clefs lines, plus the F third line, plus all this put together. So imagine string quartet was just treble bass and 1 viola clef. And if I had to transpose it, I had to read it in viola clef and tenor clef. Skills for transposing at view were important for accompaniment of singers when the publishers didn't publish the songs, the arias in every key, or most voice heights, you know, for high, middle, low voice, which today exists. And if it doesn't, you can go on a computer, push a button and print it in any key you want. So this many years that I spent studying the grammar of music, like I like to call it, through this craftsmanship knowledge of the music from the roots up, appears today with technology, computers, and capacity to bypass all these archaic, apparently so, and there are in part, know-hows about music making, music absorbing, music reading, music translating, music transposing, music trans something. Or especially the clefs and all these antiquated things appear today naturally as somebody who learns very intensely Latin or Greek, and they don't see what is the purpose of him if he's gonna work on computers. But I think that I cannot say that I am proud of it. I just had to go through it. I thought it was neat. When I was a child, I thought it's like a child who likes math would like more math. If a child likes Egyptology, will like more things about Egyptology. So it's an acquired taste. At the same time, it's a driven taste by probably an intuition, an inner call, possibly sometimes parents-oriented, sometimes driven against the parents, like famous sons or daughters of famous musicians who have to go in music against the will of their parents, and in other cases famous musicians who become famous by fighting the will to become a musician against parents who don't consider, which is naturally understandable, that this is a profession, since it's really a calling and therefore it's precarious. And so if you find ways to organize the income compared to the calling, then they can accept that. But it's all these situations where you build yourself against odds, or you build yourself with a tidal wave pulling you forward. And in the case of Mademoiselle Boulanger, I think she realized that because I was a child, 7-year-old, I was to be taught the things properly from the ground up, taking the time it will take and working on it daily, intensely, but not rushing for an exam, a graduation, and a date. In fact, compared to schools which, by the essence of the group of students, have to organize a style, again a form, and therefore they have to graduate in a given time regardless if they're matured for it or not. So this kind of one-to-one dispensed teaching that she chose to teach me, this mentoring at its highest level of artistic and philosophic approach of patience and hard work, of humility in front of the work, was mostly also something that was her respect for this, at most a hope of a future that a child that I was represented in her eyes. or must have, I don't know. I try to think now how she would have thought of me then, that I am in the later part of my life, what I see with students myself when they come and I see how they're yearning for this or that. I try to give them the answers, or more or less how to answer themselves to the questions in all these philosophic ways. But part of the studies were also the grammar of music, and Mademoiselle Dieudonné, Annette Dieudonné, it's important to mention her first name because it's proper to do so, and to respect her also for the affection I had for her, and that she had for most of us who studied there at different points of their musical path in life. Some came as students, some came as adults already, some came as teachers to re-understand what to do when they teach, some because they are trying to become perhaps conductors from having been pianists, or some because they are pianists and they think about theorists, and some because they're music teachers to understand how to think the music, how to understand the organization of the music in terms of the harmony, the contrapoint, the fugue, and the different knowledge-based facts. But ultimately, at the A and the Z, at the alpha and the omega, was always the beauty of the music. God gave it such meaningful. It's almost as if we are such small thing to try to understand it, but not because we understand it that do we have to explain it. We can just enter in the grammar of the knowledge of the piece, but we don't have to dwell over it by giving the illusion that we understand how it's made. We can observe and astonish and share the awe in front of the aspects of its wholesome beauty, its detailed beauty, its aesthetic rhetoric, its narrative meaningfulness. I mean, you don't work so hard to learn, study, and decorticate things as if you're going to penetrate some kind of mystery that is hidden inside it, if you think so. I think it's because at the get-go it touches you to the heart, and the more you want to know, the more you learn how it's made. And she helped us a lot to teach ourselves how to study. By the writing, by the notating, by the memory writing the piece, and so you start understanding the flow of events, how the voices go where they do. And a pianist who plays his quartet obliges himself or herself to read from the score, to hear the score, to follow the four parts. Of course, you can do it in the string quartet version of the texture of the A minor piano sonata by Mozart. But you start hearing it as a quartet because you can play a quartet on the piano. Of course, you cannot play a quartet on a single other instrument unless perhaps it's organ or harp, but polyphonic ones. But so you have to be always in a group. You have to sing one part, you have to know the other part. The listener has the GPS through the form, and the composer gives the GPS through the form to the performers who know where is the exposition. So there is a certain tutorial aspect of the formal music, and I find that Mozart used it, but it remains so transparent that you don't see it, you don't hear it, you don't feel it. You feel like you're moving, flowing into this driven fact of this it's barless, and that it has an internal flow that never stops to express itself until it expresses itself at its fullest without any formal held backs. With the phrasing by two, the cello with the dominant ostinato, and then intense this time the thirds that are driven between viola and second violin, trills like a scream almost, a screech. violin on top, number 1. Going down the melodic, rather harmonic, and because of the viola, playing the B natural of the ascending, you have the chromaticism, which is the dissonance. Well, he doesn't really oppose it. Tallis would do, but no, he doesn't. But he just makes it almost collide, but not. That comes here, nobody expects the dominant of relative major, which in the recapitulation the same chord, well, almost dominant or diminished 7th, to go back into D minor for the second theme in the principal key. In D minor mode, not in major like sorry for this detail, in F major, which is the relative major of the first movement's exposition. And so the second theme changes twice, not only tone from relative major F major to D minor for the tonality, but mode between the major in the Romantic era. Most of the composers who would write a sonata in a principal minor key would finish in major the first movement, because they would maintain in the principal key, in the major mode, the second theme. It sounds like talking about a cooking detail about so what to the listener, but I think it changes a lot to me, because it means that you demonstrate the second theme under 2 characters. So it gives extra richness to the expression. It's hinted, it's subtle, but it is a factor. Once you're aware of it as a listener, believe me, you taste it more. Does it mean you like it more? No. You like it anyway a lot. But you know a little bit more about that ingredient, factor ingredient. Not that it determines or explains, or you have to pontificate with it, but you have to bring it out. You have to point it out. You have to search for it when you hear another sonata form in principal minor key in the tonal system, naturally, without which it doesn't make any sense. But the point is that there's such variety of styles written on the tonal system, of so many genres, of so many styles, of so many composers who customize the tonal system to their needs for their expression of a certain hybridation, or that's not a word, hybrid modal tonalization for Ravel compared to others, of Franck. And so all of a sudden you hear immediately a musical language world where it uses the same alphabet, but it says different things like different languages do when they use the same alphabet to be in an analogy that could work for that. I must say that when he arrives at this chord in the exposition, he has this very long bridge that goes all the way to B flat, and to G minor, and to F major finally. He dwells on it. Bridge for the second theme. And these leaps of the octaves will be so important in the development to come, you'll see. In the opening is a descending octave. Here it's ascending. It's the rise, the throw forward. In his Sonata K310 is a slow movement he does. these examples which I throw at your face, poor you, I'm sorry, I'm confusing you with too many examples. Too many analogies, too many examples, too many thoughts in my brain overflow, and I want to share my enthusiasm for the piece. It ends up by being a little bit, to say the least, very much, alas, confusing, because it goes in every other direction, and anybody who wants to follow it step by step is lost already. So I have to be more disciplined in my thought progression of the Mozart first movement of K421, since that is what I chose to share with you today. The bridge leads to the second theme. Yes, I'll try to be very serious about it, because I don't want to start comparing to the other themes that come to mind, the other F majors coming to mind, what Mozart did in this opera, what Mozart did in this quartet, what Mozart did in that symphony. It's almost like radio station, rather a radio receiver, and you have to tune on one station and not let the other stations come over and take over the tuning of that station. So therefore the second theme finishes in F major. Couldn't be more bright. Accompaniment, which was so dramatic, in minor, D in the opening. Here, the same repeated notes become light and fun. The staccato can be light, fun, or interrupted legato, to 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 to, pop 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 pop, but that the string players can do much more naturally than the string players hitting the strings on the piano, piano hitters, keyboard hammers. All these decorations, all these fun. It's really fun, all these decorations of the violin going as high as possible. To conclude, we have the syncopation of the 504. I cannot, excuse me, but immediately the Beethoven conclusion of the first sonata comes to mind for this. Does it mean I have to think about it when I play it? Do I have to touch it when I teach it? Do I have to confuse you when I give it as an example? I think it is to do with the side notes, is the bottom of the page notes, where you could get further into search about it, or you want to continue reading and then you'll go later to that. But I think it's important to have this system of thinking as a tree with branches, and some branches lead you nowhere, some branches bring you to another understanding, and some bring you back to the main trunk of the tree, which is what I do more or less with my brain thoughts process. To remain back to this example of the conclusion of the exposition, syncopation 504 B flat. The subtle usage of accaciaturas from under semitones that bring the sense of chromaticism as a colorization, as a hint of minor but not. And the syncopation is some kind of a drama returning after. The second theme being so smiley. This alarming repeated note, which plays the second violin. It's very important important. It's not so just decorative. It is driven, repeated note, ostinato as we call it, because it is. I even playfully call it dostinato or fastinato if it's according to the usage of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, spelling of the notes. Sense of urgency, ta 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 ta, ta alarming, not it could be with Alberti, but I think it's a hint to the fourth movement. The way the whole quartet ends. There is in this last movement this obsessive repetitivity of the note. And that goes back to the symbolism of the repeated note that Bach describes musically in his narrative depiction of death when he does this cantata number 8, Jesu Christ, when will I die? Wann will ich sterben? Strings in accompaniment to oboes. In the introduction before the choir starts in 12/8. And on the top of it you have a flute that plays the repeated note. And we know that Bach uses this as a symbolism for the bell of the church bell announcing a funeral or a death. And so there's something that Mozart alarmingly does there in that finale with the repeated note, which I find in the first movement conclusion of the exposition. Innocently happy in F major appears to be just a relaxed repeated note. But then at the end, as I played for you, in D minor. It takes a different dimension. So you will see in the development of the first movement already, before the fourth movement brings that, I think, to fruition, this element of the repeated note, which starts already with the accompaniment of the first movement, the pattern that has the repeated note, but not as fast, obviously, at the opening. In the development, which is strechissimo, is dramatissimo. It starts at the get-go in E flat. Excuse me, how many D minor pieces do you know that start in E flat, their development? I don't know. Perhaps in the flat 6 when Beethoven does in the D major sonata. It is a shock surprise. D major, B flat minor. Major, excuse me. I was hopping. Oh, well, not yet. Ludwig didn't do that. He did B flat major, which is already dramatically flagrant compared to D major, which is the principal key. Here we are in D minor, and the development starts in. Of course, it modulates a lot starting from there, but it. I think it's to say something about the chromaticism is a mean not only of colorization of the harmonic texture, but also in narrative statement about psychological manipulation of the listener's expectation by announcing something is going to go really bad. Just like in the soundtrack of a film, they prepare you when there is a suspenseful waiting until whatever scary thing happens on the screen. Of course, there it's music without image, or words, music without lyrics. So the harmonic progression, the tonality choice, it has to do with it. I think it's a shock and awe. It's Sturm und Drang, as Schubert will do a lot of these, dramatic changes of mood, like in the two cello quintet when he goes into, well, anyway, I have to stay on the spot, which is 421 development. Understand by now the purpose of it, now you've got it. This development is a condensed energy of emotion, of drive, of all the effects, chromaticism, minor modes, all and the above, dissonances by collision, purposely tension, drama, chaos of emotional proportions. Within a string quartet, you would say, it's just string quartet is music for salon, for rich donors and some perhaps amateur patrons, which is the case in the time, of course. But Mozart wrote dramatic things. This is one of the second of the quartets he wrote to Haydn. These are our children. He was not exactly super old composer. Of course, he never became old enough in age, but I guess he was born old. That's another question which I cannot define, and nobody really will try to. But nevertheless, he gives us here all sort of like as if it's a condensed version of most of his works. It's like in this development you have a whole piano concerto, you have a whole opera almost in its nucleus, in its intensity. You have the chromaticism, so the chromatic organizations of canonic superpositions. You have so many things going on, and modulations that come out of nowhere and that make you strangely feel like he's really exploring you psychologically. I think I, as a listener, remain devastated after I hear this. Nothing but the bottom of the exposition's introduction, when he stops on what we thought was the dominant of B flat, but is a German sixth, augmented sixth. To A minor instead of B flat major. It's like as if this chord betrayed you. This chord was supposed to bring you to B flat where you travel towards. But he denies you that. He denies you that. I think he's there thinking loud voice is a philosopher. Why, when, where, and how. In each beat of the cello descending, like in the opening scale, here it's as if each step is an exploration of a new option, possibility, drop, drama. It's almost as if you're in a course to an abyss. What am I in A flat minor? Okay, I'm in D flat major, and no. The inharmonic E flat is in fact a D sharp. That's the traitor. And all of a sudden the trills between cello and viola become tremors, shivers of the soul. Oh my God, what happened to me? It's the proverbial fear of existential fear, and is topped by cross relation, diminished and minor, and major, minor and major seconds, produced dissonances provoked in this rising by step, hoping to get out of this drop by step. This is Stabat Mater. Beethoven in 109 variation. With the ascending, well, anyway, in major it sounds less dramatic than in minor. But here Mozart develops it on top of the trills. These shivers. Tries to bring you to the expression that it's going to come out, perhaps out of this abyss of emotional chaos by some satirical or ironic laugh. I can hear it in operatic. The laugh of despair. And go back to business as usual. No. He drops you back to the abyss, like you are driven to it. You are magnetically attracted. And then he starts this time the descending octaves of the opening theme, superimposing it in canonic semitones. With these dissonances between violin 1 and 2. I mean, this is Don Giovanni in condensed, but also in more intense, because it's so short and so unexpected, and it's like you wonder, where does it bring me? It's almost like seeing a horror film going too fast. My whole life goes in front of my eyes. Oh my God. It results in the return of the second theme. The unexpected F major that comes really like the relief, happiness, sunshine. how the repeated notes return, and enticingly, and almost in the beginning unnoticed, because they're just happy in F major, but when it returns to D minor, they become more and more calling, and calling of you. What did you do with your life? What did you do with your life? What did you do with your life? Which is exactly what he does in Don Giovanni. Also in D minor. That is perhaps another coincidence or truth about the choice. Same chromatic, dynamically and expressively a D minor in the Concerto 466. I think I dropped myself in the abyss of my examples. Too many, but all of them bringing me another step deeper into the... It's like Mademoiselle Boulanger used to say that when she met in the garden Paul Valéry, who was a famous writer, that goes without to say for those who know him. But the point is that she said, when he was talking to me, I couldn't always understand everything he was saying, though I believe she could, but nevertheless I was a child, so she was telling me this. But the attention is in the way his cane was doing rounds on the sand, and of the floor, and the garden, the sandy area, I guess. And she said when he was making the point, he was making smaller circles, and then at some point he just pushes the cane on the center. It's probably not a big deal by itself, but I was always thinking that's very interesting, because in a way when I hear Mozart going this, I find that he's driving me towards the center of the circle of his abyss, musically, dramatically, emotionally. Is it Don Giovanni who's losing his status of enjoyer of life into his decay and rotting in hell, last scene? Or is it in the D minor concerto where the piano part starts with this totally away from the drama, simple song when the theme is syncopations with upbeats and chromaticism? sense of rising until it returns to D minor. It's almost struggling to go step by step, like Sisyphus on the mountain. Again, all my analogies come in mind, but I should select what I want to tell you, which is, if a composer studies composition, if a pianist studies piano, if a quartet musician studies quartet, if whoever musicologist writes an article about K421 quartet, regardless from which point of view you enter into the D minor Mozart music, you could say, let's hear the Requiem, let's hear Don Giovanni, let's hear Concerto in D minor 466, let's hear the Fantasy in D minor for piano, let's hear the quartet. Not because quartet players play quartets, sonata players play sonatas, operatic singers, obviously opera singer sings opera, and that goes without to say, they won't sing fugues. But the fact is that different trades in music can reach you, bring you to reach an understanding of the music from one point of view. Of course, you have the awareness that Mozart is a great genius, but perhaps you don't know exactly the connections, the dots, how to connect the dots by your own knowledge or by the awareness. Of course, you have everything available online today more than ever in my generation, but you have to make the dots. And sometimes the dots are made by some people who then will drive you to think one way or another way. You want to think your way, to your way, not just your text or your text. Your text is the original text in German with a play on words, your text. It becomes your knowledge, and it nourishes your psyche, it nourishes your understanding, it nourishes your analyzing of the piece. Sorry, my English fails me when I get so driven, and in general. But in particular, I would say that it's a general culture. And so having Don Giovanni and the Requiem and the K466 in your subconscious ear, from having bathed in it emotionally and musically, regardless if you play it or you hear it, or you read it, or you hear it and read it, and you watch it, whatever it is, but it lives with you, then all of a sudden the quartet becomes part of that D minor Mozart. Of course, you can say, okay, Mozart wrote always the same piece, just for different groups. That is possibly true. The Requiem is a sacred work, the quartet is a non-sacred work, the piano sonatas, in this case, the Fantasy is improvisational work, because it is by essence and improvised, and it was for different purposes. And of course, while the purpose of the piece changes, the toolbox Mozart used could be found in here and there alike. You can see, oh, I can recognize this usage of the octave, this usage of the third, this usage of the canonic thing, this usage of that. Okay, you become aware of things that you were not aware before, because if you do only one trade, you only think of the piece as such. And of course, because time constraints doesn't allow us to have enough curiosity to develop the knowledge of many things, so we remain relatively focused on a niche, and we understand it through only it, which by itself it's fine. The string quartet by Mozart doesn't need the Requiem, K466 concerto, and the D minor Fantasy to exist. As a matter of fact, I'm sure that that is not necessarily the case, but when you are cultivated, you can connect dots from things that are not meant originally to be connected. And then starts the curiosity of yours combined to your expression of emotional burst for a music or for a painting or for a sculpture or for artwork of a different form, it be a video, a film, or a narrative, or a story, or a novel. That's the beauty, I think, of the also diversity of interpretations, that you come into the piece from one point of view, but then you start having other understandings, and then that enriches your, it opens your horizons, and then you decide, you understand that instead of getting lost in the plethora of available information that you could gather, or you're told to look for, if, let's say, seek for it by your teacher. If I say, go and listen to this week and then play the piece next next week. And then you might say, yes, but I'm a little bit lost in translation. It's too much information. I need more time to filter it. I understand that. This is a problem. I agree. Rome was not built in a day, as they say, and I was lucky to have been a student of my very old teacher when I was a very young child, which meant that she had a lot of time that she chose to give me, not that she had it. But I was very privileged that she did. And I was an open book as a child. And of course, emotionally, I was probably with the musical drive that I had, I was brought into to drink from the fountain, from the source. So the more she was opening the source of the water fountain faster, the more I was driven, because I think this is what happens when you are lucky to develop your calling. While it's tough to do it, because she's without any excuse for you because of your drive. She was very tough, and I think it was her way. Perhaps her mother was like that with her. Perhaps she was like this with Lily, her younger sister of 6 years, who was a composer, died very young, but who was her student in back 60 years before I met her. So it wasn't like touch, feel, oh, good child, fine, it's okay. No. Probably inside herself, she might have been a little bit more so maternally emotional, but she didn't show it to me outside. But since I was a child and she was a very old lady, there was nothing but music in between us, is a free flow, without me having a predestined opinion about it, and her trying to influence me. Of course, she did guide me, but she didn't influence me. She didn't give me a key to open the door. She gave me tools how to build a lock in order to open the door. And this is philosophically essential. That's why when you write the Prelude and Fugues from scratch before you play them, you learn them not only as performer, but you learn them as composer, regardless if you become composer or if you are. In my case, I already was budding. But the point is that I find that to be the case. When you learn how to write in school, you don't become always writer, or it's not meant to. When you learn mathematics, is to organize your thoughts and be a responsible citizen and be rational, but not by essence becoming always an architect or a researcher. And same thing in general studies in music. You should be able to absorb different elements of D minor in Mozart before you play your D minor, whichever it is that your trade brings you to play. That's what I would say can help. Even today, in the time where everything has to be done quickly and there's no time for time, competition is tough, and the graduation is quick, and maturation is to be there, or it's not. Then it's not way. You have to fit in the study program. It's tough. It's a lot of pressure for students. If you don't tell them any of these ways of musicians' knowledge, of depth, for which the single line that you'll play as a pianist in the D minor fantasy could be nourished by this. And by from practicing the details of everything that you play, the intonation for the string player, the vibrato, the bowing, the phrasing, the merging of the group of the four musicians who are four brains, four hearts, 8 hands and all that, and four psyches that have to become one when you do was stricken already young when I used to listen to string quartets. When they have offbeat and playing on the offbeat chords, they always breathe and almost inhale like vacuum cleaners with their nostrils. They beat. And And it didn't bother me. As a matter of fact, I have to be careful when I play. I breathe too hard, too strong on these beats, because I find that there is this energy, this almost, as I said, bite of the rest that is almost violent, like here. I play the 4 parts by myself with one brain, 2 hands, and a heart, and feet for the pedal, obviously. But the string quartets, it's an individual. It's bringing 4 destinies together, and they have to just focus on this upbeat, offbeat, and play the chromatic rising. Brings the second theme in the original D minor. The second theme in principal minor key. Chromatizations. With a cello melody. I'm shivering of emotion so much. It's electrifying. It's emotionally electrifying. It's dramatically electrifying. It's watching something, hearing something, reading something, observing something, scrutinizing something. It's a gaze of a person. It's a gaze of an animal looking at you. It's humanity at its purest. It's whatever is the experience of life: struggle, drama, hope, laughing, like the second theme first time. So much goes on, and then the second time, and the stressfulness of the stress of these repeated notes, and the chromatics, and the minor, and the major, and the modulations, and the development. Roller coaster of emotions, I tell you. And when I say that, it's an understatement. It's a tsunami of emotions. And how lucky that as a pianist you can play a whole quartet by yourself. A requiem by yourself. Of course, you don't. You hint it, you don't play the real piece, because you don't have a choir, an orchestra, and singers, for which is meant. You don't have 4-string quartet players. Or 5 in the case of the 2 viola quintets by Mozart, where he played second viola. That's another the viola story of his. Right? Probably he wrote also the most juicy parts for this viola, for the purpose that he himself served to write this of the chromaticism. I must imagine him saying, "No, I did that for myself." And for us, after him, for humanity. And I find that teaching music is not just transmitting a skill, which it is. It's not only transmitting a knowledge and an experience, which by fact it is. It's not only preparing a successful quick maturation of the piece that is performed by the student, because you realize that a semester is whatever, and a trimester is whatever, and a year is whatever. So, and you of course know deep inside you that it will take a life to develop. So if you tell the student you'll play it well in 25 years, or successfully enough to satisfy your yearning for it, they will either be disappointed, disillusioned, or perhaps hate you. And perhaps it shouldn't be told, because that is a very inconvenient truth. It's philosophically right, and sometimes perhaps you won't grow up enough, because life interrupts physically. And like Lipati, my favorite pianist of the past, used to say, I will never play a Beethoven sonata in public before I'm 50, because he considered he wasn't mature enough, and he died 35 from blood cancer, which is tragic. Not only because he died and for him, but for us because of what he could have given us in terms of interpretation, readings of the pieces, which he pretended he never practiced. He said he only practiced on the table reading the scores and directly played them. That's another story for piano interpretational practicing, which I don't know if it's even adaptable to students. I guess not, and I wouldn't go that far, because I think it becomes very difficult to adapt unique cases. Is like as if you teach composition and tell people that Mozart wrote the overture of Don Giovanni's opera in an afternoon before the premiere. Well, that doesn't really teach you much, except that you know you can't and you won't. But even if it takes you a lifetime to reach it, and if you don't, fine, but if you at least yearn towards it, the point of it is the trip itself, not the arrival point, then of course you will play well this piece within some years, but perhaps not during the time you study it. You have to revisit it after 2, 3, 4 years, perhaps again for a competition, perhaps for a performance, perhaps for a jury, perhaps for an audition to get a job. And then afterwards you're going to teach it once, twice, 3, 10 times, 20 times, live. Recording session, possibly radio broadcast. Perhaps you will write a book about the quartet. Perhaps you'll write an article about Mozart's D minor pieces. You don't know. And you might not do any of these, but the nourishment is what drives you. As the French say, l'appétit vient en mangeant. You get more appetite the more you eat. It doesn't mean that you are full. It means that the more the ingredients, the more the tasting, the taste buds are aroused, the more you are able to define what you're eating and enjoy combinations of foods and a dissonance compared to a tonic consonance. I mean, if music could be explained, it wouldn't be music. It's like trying to translate a beautiful novel from another language. You will never restitute the choice of the words, the sound of the music of the language in which is thought, because it's part of the expression, even if the feelings are international and universal and forever, like love, hate, hope, desire, eagerness, possibly anxiety and disappointment and betrayal. All these things are universal, but at the same time they are connected to the expression. And so Mozart's D minor quartet goes through its own language, its own time period. I played on an instrument he didn't hear. I hear it the ways perhaps he didn't think of it. Perhaps if he was back here, Wolfgang, please forgive me, he might just say, Emile just said stupid things about my music. I never thought any of this. I never meant all of that. There is no depth in the repeated notes. There's no chromaticism in the abyss of humanity's chaos struggle. There is no driven repetitivity in the chords in the beginning with the 8th note rest that is crunch into it that allows the melodic line to be heard. Perhaps he wasn't probably even aware of all these analytical elements that I try to describe when I try to understand if that is what it meant to him in his intent compared to what I understand of it in my perhaps loss of translation. But regardless, perhaps I'm totally wrong, and I love it for the wrong reasons. But I still love it, and I want to share this love for the piece with you as a performer, as a composer, as a theorist, as a musicologist, as a scholar, as a nothing, as a just musician, meaning without a specialization, as a general practitioner of music. Of course, I would like to hope that some of the elements correspond to what I think I put the dots together from the different works of Mozart that I think are echoing into this, or from this. And that teaches me how to hear, teaches me how to listen rather, how to think, how to organize my thoughts, how to project my interpretation. It gives me an inner drive for the phrasing, the direction, the line, the meaning of stuff. Not just the stuff itself, just not notes that are recited correctly, rightfully, with a good addition, with a good dynamic marking, with a tasteful ritenuto, because the teacher, because the tradition, because the edition, because the recording, because I don't know who's whatever. But ultimately it's you yourselves that make the choice to dislike or like an interpretation, or to play yourself in an interpretation that you choose compared to another because you think this is what it brings you more the meaning of the piece, regardless if perhaps you're in fact wrong. I played on the wrong instrument, with the wrong opinion, with the wrong tempo, according to somebody else who has the opinion that they own the knowledge. I don't believe that. I think that nobody has the intrinsic truth, but we have musical sources. We can say manuscripts and try to read into the manuscript, try to read into a beautifully and meaningfully driven article that goes deep into the knowledge of the piece, the genre, that is really going into the extreme, like watching an important painting with an art historian next to you. Wow! Does it make you love a painting that you hated, or does it make you hate a painting that you loved after the explanation, at least the one that you're given? I doubt it. I think either you love it more, either you understand it more, but I don't think you can love it if you didn't. Perhaps you can read into it what you didn't understand. Perhaps you were a little bit, if not, well, love and hate is the same for the two sides of the token. But let's say you are not even with an opinion. Say, I don't understand why Mona Lisa's smile is so meaningful to me. She just looks at me with a weird face that is poker face, smile, not really, slightly, not mysterious or whatever. Self-portrait of himself in the woman or not, and who's to care? It's what I like it to be, in fact, inside my little brain. Of course, with his art historian, I will learn more what the background says, the colors, the meaning, what the other paintings of Da Vinci did, which hand he painted with, and what happened to his hand when he stopped painting because he had arthritis, and blah, blah, and blah, blah, and blah, blah. Of course, does it mean that you love it more because you know all these things? Probably not. I think sometimes ignorance is bliss, as a student of mine a long time ago told me, because once you're aware of voice leadings and of elements, you're almost lost in the performance because you hear so much more than you could hear. It reveals itself so much more purely to you. You have your taste buds so much more aware of what you're eating that you're becoming almost drunk, so to say, by the food you're hearing. Your ears, you need to put silence, and they say, I cannot hear more anymore because I hear too many things. I have to process. My brain cannot process all this. It's like when you watch a film and you have a quick change of image and you feel like, oh my God, I don't have time to apprehend anything. My brain is provoked and I just react as it goes to these subliminal images or very short chopped images, and I feel like it's purposely made so that I am in a situation like Chopin's Fourth Ballade. After having most of the time have one harmony for 6 beats, he has one every beat. But you don't really hear every harmony synchronization of this in real time as a listener, if you can absorb this quick succession of secondary dominants in the G flat, then C sharp major, B major, F sharp, then Neapolitan, when this kind of harmonic rush, stretto comes there, it's an effect that leaves you mesmerized after you heard the ballad for the most of the melodic singing of it. And this towards the coda comes as a element of emotional, almost overwhelming. I think the brain cannot, and the heart and the soul cannot even make sense of it. You're just shocked in the initial word of the meaning. You're just unable to react. It's too much to believe, too much to comprehend. You realize, or you sense the sense of abyss and drama, but you don't really realize what you're hearing. And of course, all this within a string quartet, which is a format for something more cozy, homey, well, more for people's in the 18th, 19th centuries mentions, but not a concert hall projection, not an opera, not an organ in the church with the resonance and the acoustics, where the dramatic acoustics already enhance that sense of drama or of abyss, of hurting, or of elevation of the spiritual rising of the soul. This is in a more intimate situation, but you hear so much going on in the intricate voices, the internal voices, and the top and the bottom and everything. I'll play for you that first movement, and I'll give you my best gift. I will not speak. you.